Hi, it's Seth, here with the next video in the series on silencing the inner critic. So our theme this time is the question of grounding. What does it mean to be grounded? Well, it could mean a lot of things. So I just ask you here at the beginning to think about what it means for you. And to make this a little more concrete, you can also ask yourself, do you feel grounded right now? Now, just very quickly to review the basic framework that we are using in this series of videos, and you can review the first two videos in the series if you'd like to get this in detail. What the inner critic does basically is two things. It attacks, it's unkind to us, that voice in the head, and it's also a distraction that takes us away from presence. So practicing kindness with ourselves and practicing presence are the basis of what we are looking at in each video in the series. And at this point, we've already outlined 5 different elements of experience that are always present, which we can use as kind of anchors to tune into presence and also to notice the quality of our experience. In other words, are we moving towards or away from well-being? In the previous video, we talked about breath, and this time we are going to talk about ground. So a moment ago, I asked you what it means to be grounded and if you feel grounded right now. And there are many ways to think about grounding, but a very good place to start is just to acknowledge that as a human being on planet Earth, you are always in the field of gravity. So grounding is not purely a physical question, but we really can't escape the physics of our experience at any point. And what I think will become clear as we go on is those experiences we have that we might describe as emotional or psychological that make us feel less grounded, they tend to show up very clearly in the body in terms of our relationship to the gravitational field and in particular the ground below our feet. Now, just as we said with breath, and as we will continue to highlight as we go through all of the different elements of presence that we want to talk about, when we think about ground, we need to think about it in terms of a relationship, us and the ground. And in terms of how that connection is embodied, we want to include the skeleton, right? So the ground, the solid earth below you, is what supports you. It's what you stand on. But if you include the whole body, that solid structure is your skeleton, and your head on top, it's supported by the ground, supported by the skeleton as well. So basically, we're talking about posture. And that's a huge subject. I'm not going to try to delve into every aspect of posture in this video, but it is worth noting, again, that our posture is the intersection between a question that we can think of on the physical plane, but also very much relates to the health of our heart, of our mind, of our soul. So what does it mean to be upright? Well, that has something to do with our dignity, doesn't it? If you are able to stand up for yourself, if you're able to hold your head up, right, that says something about being able to be comfortable with who you are in the presence of others, your position in the world, those kinds of things. And of course, when we say we have no ground to stand on, or we're on shaky ground, right? Language helps us to see these metaphors. That could mean that we don't really feel that safe, or we don't trust the situation. We don't trust ourselves. Are we easily knocked off balance, or are we poised? These are all questions that relate to both our physical posture as well as our overall relationship to ourselves, to the people around us, and the world. Another thing that makes this question of grounding a little bit complicated is that we want to be grounded in the sense of being solid and being able to hold our position and not get knocked off balance and all of the rest. But we also don't want to be stuck. We don't want to be frozen. We want to be able to use the ground for leverage. So we push off the ground with our feet in order to move and to go somewhere. So the question of stability and instability, it really depends on our situation. The fact that we have a certain kind of instability is actually what makes it possible for us to move. As two-legged creatures, or as creatures that stand up on two legs, we have a very different experience of the environment than other animals, and we can orient in different ways and accomplish different things because of our particular relationship to gravity, which is so unique. Now, if you're like a lot of modern human beings and you're fairly sedentary, if you spend a lot of time sitting, well, sorry to say, but this puts you at a bit of a disadvantage because your ability to maintain an upright posture is really at the source of being able to do anything else with ease. If you know that is the case for you, that, maybe you're in front of a computer quite a lot, you're not incredibly active, I would definitely recommend for you to begin to check out some of the videos on this channel and more generally to get involved with the Feldenkrais method. In our culture, we're not taught how to live comfortably in our bodies and how to move efficiently, and yet we can learn to do this. So there's many videos on this channel, and I'll be mentioning some of them as we go through. But this is a really good way to just begin to upgrade your overall relationship to your body and to movement and to gravity. And as you'll see, everything else flows from this. So at any given moment, to ask the question, how is my relationship to the ground, is really to ask the question of, am I supported or not? And beyond my physical support, it's a question of, do I feel supported in my being? So as I mentioned on this channel, I have many videos that go over specific aspects of physical posture and even begin to make the connections to our emotional experience. And I'd like to talk about some general principles that we can derive from some of those videos and in general that come from the Feldenkrais method. But first, let's just do something very simple and practical, which is, whether you're sitting or standing, could you right now try to find the most comfortable upright posture you can? That's simple, relaxed, you're not being graded on it. But if you really pay attention, you feel the ground under your feet. If you're sitting, you feel your sit bones. And you just imagine your head lifting up, like as if it was a balloon, rising to the highest possible point you can find on your spine. And look for an easy breath here. Okay, so we're not going to call this perfect posture, but we're just going to call it maybe conscious posture because you've been asked to pay attention. And then feel how that is, and then just to a very small degree, allow yourself to kind of collapse towards the ground. Your head slips off the top of the spine and just come into that other place. And now if you go between these two things, so you allow your head to float back up, you really have a sense that the top of your head is as close as it can be comfortably to the ceiling right now. You're not doing something to rigidify, but then you sort of let go somewhere and you drop. if you continuously go back and forth between these two positions, you will feel obviously physical changes, and you can also begin to imagine that your posture, in the sense of your position in front of the world or in front of a person that you might be with, someone you might be talking to, for example, is quite different. So when we're upright in an easy, simple way, generally speaking, it's easier to breathe, right? And that was the focus of the last video in this series. Because as soon as you collapse off of your skeletal support, many muscles have to come into play and contract in order to keep you from falling all the way down. And those contractions, especially in and around the ribs and the belly, they are going to inhibit the movement of your diaphragm, which is central to your breathing. So breath and balance are intimately related. Now, if you collapse and you stay collapsed, or you even imagine walking around, and that's, if you see someone limping, they're essentially taking a slumped posture into motion. You can feel many places that you have discomfort. Ideally, when you're standing upright, here's the ground, and then you have what we call alignment, right? Of one bone more or less stacked on top of the other. And when you step on the ground, since the ground, you don't step through the ground, the force of your weight into the ground, it returns up. And so what you're wanting is that ground force to go up right through the center of your joints, all the way up through your legs, your hip joints, your spine, and up through the top of your head. But when, for example, you're like this, that force comes up, and then here, in that place where you don't have clear alignment, it's going to move across the joints. It's going to cause a shearing force, which is going to do damage and cause pain in the soft tissue. So a slumped posture leads to that kind of discomfort. And again, how does it feel? How do you feel about yourself when you're kind of like this, right? Now, if we come back to the general theme of our series, the inner critic, what's important to notice is that we can be in this place of being more or less upright, comfortable, with a fairly clear sense of ground. And then under certain circumstances, we collapse. Now, it could be because we lose our footing. It could be some kind of question of physical coordination, but it could also be because of something that someone says to us, or something that we think, something that the inner critic says inside, some kind of attack on who we are. We might use a metaphor here that it pulls the ground out from under us, right? We don't feel supported. We feel that our reputation is under fire, or our intelligence, or our good character, something that we rely on. Again, think of the metaphor of support, or our foundation. Something there has been attacked and we collapse. Okay, so I think we've established by now that if you are well grounded, in a physical sense, you are going to have a clear connection to the ground. You're going to have a sense of uprightness, even lightness, as if you're rising up away from the ground rather than sinking. And you feel balanced. You feel that you can't be knocked over. So when we get into these questions of emotional experience, or the psychological experience, in other words, what's going on in the heart and the mind, we could start to notice a different sense of posture. So sometimes people talk about, oh, that person was just posturing. In other words, they were posing, they were putting on an act of some kind. And on the physical level, this might correspond to a sort of standing up straight in a sort of a forced way, right? But there's also a sense that, for example, if what's being challenged right now is my character, the idea that I'm a good person, well, I might I might not want to admit that I feel somehow less than the other people around me. And at that point, because I want to be accepted, even though I might have this internal feeling, I go into some kind of a performative behavior, let's just say. Now, I might succeed through my physical posture, my face, in portraying to other people that basically I'm okay. But I might be ignoring something that's inside that doesn't feel right. And if something's not right, of course, we want to figure out how we can make that better. But first, if you remember back to what we talked about in terms of kindness, the very first step is always to pay attention to what is actually going on. And so this means dropping out of that performative context. If we notice that we're posturing in that sense, that we're performing, there might be something that's happening that is a question of our dignity. What would it be like in that moment to simply accept who we are, accept the situation that we're in? Now, this doesn't mean that if we don't have a lot of friends, or if we don't have enough money in the bank, or we just had a fight with our partner, anything like that, that we just think that's okay, no problem. But it means that we recognize what really is taking place, and we're not trying to pretend it's something else. So we're in real contact with the real situation. We accept what's happening. And even if the situation is somewhat unhappy, ironically, to recognize that situation can involve a letting go. And this can be a letting go that is different than the sort of slumping of collapse, but a letting go of unnecessary efforts that we're making to basically try to fight with reality and try to force it to be something other than what it is. So acceptance, and in the moment of recognizing reality, kind of realizing we have a resistance to it and moving into a posture of acceptance, we can at that point go back to the physical body and just notice, did I actually gain a little length? Did I find a clearer connection to the ground? Do I feel lighter? Now, let's think in terms of the mind. Something that will affect our posture here is fear. And it's worth noting, probably the most primal fear that any human being has is the fear of falling. If we don't have clear alignment, if we don't know how to stand comfortably upright, essentially we are falling. And if I'm sort of collapsed this way, as I talked about before, I'm going to be clenching in various places, which restricts my breath and just I can't relax, right? But beyond that sense of an inability to physically relax, it's I'm tense, I'm anxious, something's going to happen. I don't trust my environment. I don't trust that everything's okay. And again, we live in a world where we don't have any guarantees that everything's going to be all right in every moment. But it's as if we think that somehow if we grip a little harder, we can ensure that everything's all right. If we just check on every last detail of the situation, if we're super vigilant, if we keeping our eye out, keeping track of everything, maybe I can make everything okay. Well, there might be certain situations where you can sort of plan a lot of things and things turn out well. And that's a great thing to do. But in terms of the ongoing flow of daily life, the thing that we can be the most sure about is what we don't know, right? And there's a classic spiritual inquiry where you sit and you just ask yourself the question, who am I? You might come up with all kinds of answers. You might say your name or start describing, your personality or something like that. But then what you're supposed to do is put all those answers aside and ask the question again, who am I? Now, if you do this practice, what you'll experience is that every time you have to put aside the answers, you have to go deeper and deeper into your experience. You might just start to feel something like, I am human, or I am a being. Just the experience of being alive. That is, we could say, the ground of being, or just the most basic fundamental experience of presence. And as simple as that sounds, how often are you truly connected to just that experience of I'm alive right now? Typically, we're thinking about solving some kind of problem, or we're engaged in some activity, and our simple aliveness, just the very raw sensation of being in a body, of having these feelings and energies and being in gravity, right? Relating to the environment. It's not really right there on the surface for us. It's kind of buried down below. And so, in fact, paradoxically, this sense of not knowing, this feeling that we can't control everything, that's the one thing that we really do know if we're honest with ourselves. So you see that we can take this idea of grounding into many other aspects of experience beyond the body. But again, the body is really, we could say, the ground of our experience. And so just wrapping up here, I'd like to do two things. First of all, I'm going to quickly mention some of the videos on my channel, which I think could be very helpful in terms of growing your sense of postural awareness and relationship to the ground. So very quickly, I have a video where you do a little of what we experimented with earlier. I call it slumping and unslumping, right? You're tall and then you're sinking. Each one of us does that in a particular way. We have a very specific pattern. And if you check out that video, you'll start to recognize your pattern. As we've also discussed, breath and posture, breath and balance are intimately related. I have a video about that. When you're standing, obviously your connection to the ground happens through your feet. So I have a couple different videos to really help you to wake up the sensations of your feet and find a more potent way of organizing the feet. So one of those is more of a deep dive, a full-length awareness through movement lesson, but there's also the shorter waking up the feet process. When you're standing, also, the ground, as I said, it comes up through your skeleton, and a very, very crucial thing is, how does your pelvis sit on top of your legs? How are you organizing the hip joints? I have a video on that. And then there is a recent video I made where you explore the soft palate inside of your mouth and how it helps to organize the head on top of the spine. And just in general, as I've mentioned, the Feldenkrais method is a beautiful practice for helping you to get more awareness of this skeletal sense, which is at the heart of being able to be comfortably grounded. And I have an entire awareness through movement series on YouTube called Biological Fitness, which would be a great place for you to start. So now what I'd like to do is just one more time kind of talk through some of the different aspects of experience, but with what we've discussed in terms of the body. As I go through these things, maybe you could listen in an embodied way and just notice, for each kind of aspect, does this give me a feeling of being a little taller or a little shorter, a little heavier or a little lighter? What happens to my breath? Do I feel a little more mobile, like I can push away from the ground in any direction, or do I feel kind of stuck, like I can't go anywhere, I'm frozen? Do I feel calm and relaxed? Remember, when we have balance, when we have grounding, there's less muscular work, or am I beginning to tense? And of course, This could have to do with something that isn't so much related to gravity, but it's going to show up in the body that way, the same way as if we were somehow in danger of falling. Do I feel balanced, or do I get a little bit unstable? And these shifts can be very small, but they're the kinds of things that we can begin to listen to when we're lost in thought, when we're engaged in a dialogue with another person, when we're reading the news. So let's quickly look at these categories. And as we did last time, when considering the breath, I'm going to give you sort of one side of the coin that might be moving towards well-being and the other that might be moving away. To move towards well-being, there's often something intentional that we can do. We maybe don't want to overdo it, but we can have an intention that helps us orient towards well-being. And when we're moving away from well-being, that's usually that we don't have a clear intention. We're kind of slipping. And so I will describe some of the factors that take us in either direction. So grounded in the body, again, is characterized by a sense of lightness and an interesting mix of both rooting into the ground, but also having a sense of being able to rise. On the other hand, if we feel that we're sinking or we're tensing, we're probably headed towards a kind of heaviness. What does it mean to be grounded in the mind? We could just say it's a sense of being calm. Now, again, our situation might be something we would describe as good or bad, but if we are calm, we're able to simply drop in. We're able to anchor with what's actually happening, as opposed to being very restless, trying to problem solve, worrying constantly. That's moving away from a sense of grounded mind. In the heart, when we're grounded, when we have that sense of being able to rise up, that gets us in touch with our dignity, right? And as we've talked about, just being able to accept my situation as what it is, rather than trying to sort of artificially change it, trusting in what is. On the other hand, if we feel shame, this is the heart moving away from ground. And we can notice that we're sort of performing, or as we said before, we're posturing in some kind of way. What does ground mean in relation to the surrounding world? Well, this is pretty concrete, right? The actual ground that we stand on. But in order to be able to ground with the world, we have to be in communication. We have to be listening. So there's a sense of real exchange, dialogue with the world. On the other hand, we can become very isolated, and this is characterized by suppressing our own expression as well as numbing the signals that are coming in. In relation to another person, we can think of love as ground, right? Just think of any parent and a child. In the beginning, the child knows nothing about the world, has no sense of how to defend herself, himself, and it's the parent, typically the mother in the beginning, right? We ground into the love of another person. And so this goes both ways, of course. So if we want to provide ground, we're loving. We welcome the person, however they are. We receive them. On the other hand, and this is rife in the world, and we experience it, unfortunately, all the time, relationships can become transactional. And this is characterized by rejecting, maybe not literally rejecting, like go away, but just not accepting a person for who they are and judging them in some way. So we can look at this, in terms of how am I showing up for the other person? I may or may not like everything that they're doing, but do I sort of put them in a box over here versus do I just sort of take them as they are and give them space? And likewise, we can notice the people that treat us on one or the other end of this scale. Do I feel grounded around this person or not? Do I help them feel grounded? And the soul. So a soul feels grounded, we might say, when it feels whole. On the other end of the scale is a sense of being broken. So I suggest again that if we have that sense of being broken, if we feel like we're fragmenting apart or we're wanting to give up, that the intention that we could have is simply knowing. And as I said before, there's a lot that we don't know. So acknowledging that is the beginning of knowing. But what we do know is that we're here, that we're alive, this sense of being. So knowing and being, those would be the key ideas for a sense of ground in the soul. So I hope that this has helped you to further map out a sense of grounding. And as we go forward, in relation to the inner critic or in relation to those actual critics that we encounter in the world or those memories that come up, whatever it is, we can just notice, how does this shift me in relation to the ground? Am I becoming more grounded or less so? And we can build with this, as we will in the upcoming videos, the other elements of presence. So for now, I'm going to stop here. I hope this has been helpful to you, and feel free to leave a comment below the videos, or if you'd like to be in touch and get my personal guidance, there's also information below the video of how you can do that. Until next time, take care.